And we're back with Pirkei Avot. We're on chapter 4, Mishna 16, and we'd like to dedicate this episode in memory of Levy ben Moshe Esther and Elisheva Levy, and also in memory of Yisrael ben Binyamin Rivka. And let's go over to Michael.
Thanks, Rav Mashiach. So in this Mishnah number 16 of Perek 4, we are introduced to Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli. And who was he? He was one of the most important Tanoim of the third generation, which is 2nd century. This rabbi studied with his father, disciple of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hilkanas and Rabbi Tarfon, whom he served even in like menial tasks. He was one of Rabbi Akiva's 5 last disciples, whom after Rabbi Akiva's death, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava ordained at the cost of his life. Hadrian's persecutions forced Rabbi Yehuda ben Eli to flee and live in hiding, and later he would often tell of his times of peril. As the persecutions abated, the sages reunited at Usha, his native city. Rabbi Yehuda joined them to be chosen Rosh Hamdabrim, leader amongst the speakers, with the right to speak first in their discussions of religious law, since he was considered the best authority on their oral teachings. He was a poor man, and Rabbi Yehuda did all kinds of labor readily, holding that work honors the worker. At one time his wife made a cloak with her own hands, which they took turns wearing, she to market and he to the Bet Midrash. So great was his piety that in the view of later sages, wherever the Talmud mentions an anonymous chosid, it means either him or Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. He drank wine only when the Torah required it and preferred vegetarian diets. When bathed and dressed in white to receive the Shabbos, he seemed to his disciples a veritable angel. Yet, with his great piety, with Torah study his dearest occupation, and despite his lament that devotion to Torah was no longer as widespread as formerly, he would readily leave his studies to add to the happiness of a bride and groom at a wedding, or to contribute his last respects to a departed human at a funeral. Such duties he held were higher, for so do you show your fellow men love and honor. So too would he readily try to reconcile a man and his wife who had quarrelled. The Mishnah indicates Rabbi Yehuda's importance by mentioning him over 600 times, more than any other Tanakh. Wow. He often disagrees with Rabbi Meir, and it is his view which is always followed in later practice. Moreover, he is considered the author of all anonymous teachings in Sifra, Torat Kohanim, the halachic midrash of the book of Leviticus. So, what does Rabbi Yehuda say in this Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda said, Have zohir b'Talmud. Be careful about study. Sheshigagat Talmud ole zadon. For an inadvertent error in study is tantamount to an intentional sin. So, Rabbi Yehuda is telling us that any errors that you make during your study, there's no concept of shogeg and mazid. We know that with Averos you can either, there are 2 levels. There's the accidental, which we call shogeg, or the mazid, which is the deliberate. But we learn that there's no difference. You are counted equally as bad. There's no accidents. There is no apologies. There is absolutely no distinction between an avera that is committed regarding learning. They are both considered as bad as each other. No accident, no deliberate. So very briefly, what does Rav Chaim of Volozhin say regarding this Mishnah? He says, a mistaken learning is considered like a willful sin. An inadvertent sin requires atonement. The greater the sin, the greater the severity of its impact. the reward for Torah study is greater than all the other mitzvot. This we learn in Gemara Shabbat 127a. So logically, the punishment for bittul Torah is greater than all other sins. Therefore, inadvertently committing bittul Torah is equal to willfully committing some other sin. So interesting words from Rav Chaim there. So, where do we learn about the importance of learning Torah? Its importance is gleaned from a statement made in Yeshua 1:8, where Hashem actually says to Yeshua regarding the Torah, he says, "This book of the Torah shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may be careful to do all that is written in it." So these are very powerful words from Hashem directly to Yeshua regarding the concept of studying Torah. Also, we learn Rambam quotes in his Hilchot Talmud Torah, in his magnificent Mishna Torah. He rules in his code, and I quote, "Every man in Jewry is obligated to study Torah, be he rich or poor, physically healthy or with afflictions, young or old." So this is a basic and undoubtable requirement and importance, and there can be no complacency in your efforts and your accuracy and the way you learn regarding Torah. We also say on Yom Kippur, we say Al Chet. One of them is, I think it's Bishgaga, where you say we're committed without knowing. And so, in other words, the Torah is telling you it's a sin not to know, not to do. You must make an effort to learn. You must make an effort to know the basics. It can be also considered. If for example you forget to bench, it's an aveira, but it's an accident. It's like an individual act. But you must consider the studying of Torah is like you are constructing something, and if you forget something, it's like you forget a hoist, one of the girders. You forget the foundations of something much bigger. And you know that when you're building a house, when you're studying Torah, you can't leave stuff out. You can't forget to put the wall, the load-bearing wall in your construction. So in other words, you have to be very, very careful. It's a very serious thing when it's not an individual act. It's a construction that you construct maybe of the whole of your life, your studying of Torah. So you must be careful to make sure that every part is included, and every part is known, every part is taken care of. It's like also, most people may not have this problem, but I know I did. If you had mathematics, if you're trying to study mathematics, if you miss out certain elements of your learning when you were young, like for example, if you didn't know how to multiply fractions, you have to know how to do these things. Otherwise, you can never really become great in mathematics if you don't understand the basics. And you have to become well versed in all the basics and the foundations of Torah to be able to become an accomplished Talmud Chacham. This is very important. So, also there is a story with the mystic Ari Hakadosh, the Arizal, and he tells us that before a person sits down to study, he is supposed to cleanse himself and purify himself, because apparently Satan is standing by your side. So if you're pure and you come to your learning with a pure mind, you are protected against this. But if you don't come with the right intentions, you will be confused and you will learn wrong things, and you will be confused by this presence that's around you. And then we come to the concept of the responsibilities of a teacher. If you decide to be a Talmud, in this Mishnah, it says, "Havi zahir b'Talmud." Be careful about study. It could also refer to be careful about teaching, because when you're a teacher, you have a huge responsibility. You have to teach clearly. You have to convey your messages and your teachings in the best possible way. In fact, I think Rambam mentioned in either Hilchot Deot or Hilchot Talmud Torah about how a teacher should convey himself and how he should project himself to his students. He shouldn't shout. He shouldn't waffle on about something. Various things. He should be as concise and as clear as possible. And this is very important because we have to understand that being very, very clear in your teachings is extremely important. First of all, it's important because the main thing is your pupils will one day perhaps become teachers of the next generation. Mm-hmm. So to be a teacher, you must bear that in mind. You have to really be the best teacher you can to also show an example of how a teacher should be. But also, if you're unclear about what you're teaching your students, you may have the same problem as with the Sadducees and Baitos.
Ah, the mistake they made with I can't remember his teachers.
Not Avtal. It's not Avtal.
No. I'll tell you.
But that was a problem of understanding. He explained correctly, but his students misinterpreted what he was saying.
Antignos ish socho.
Antignos. So this is a very important thing. It was because of a teaching that it was taken out of. If he would have, I don't think it was his fault, but I think the students were always wanted to take advantage of this misunderstanding to create their own branch, but this was a consequence of something that wasn't stressed perhaps convincingly enough. This is very, very important. So this was mentioned by Avtalion, who we know from the first Perek in the
Shema and Avtalion. Teachers of Hillel and Shammai.
Yes, they said in Avot chapter 11, first Perek, Mishna 11, he says, "O sages, be careful with your words, for you may incur the penalty of exile, and the disciples who follow you will drink from the evil waters of heresy and die. As a result, the name of heaven will be profaned." So he's very, very strict. He's saying, make sure what you're teaching, you correctly figured it out and you're projecting it in the right way, because you will you will cause your students to perhaps follow thoughts that they shouldn't. And furthermore, tell me when. So we must remember Rabbi Yehuda's dictum: the learned man, the Talmid Chacham, is judged more stringently than the ordinary man in the street. If you want to be a person of reading and learning with the knowledge of the Torah, you have to study regularly and strive to live up to the obligation that the Torah study will impose on you.
Fantastic.
And that concludes this Mishnah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, so that concludes Mishnah 16. Next time we convene, we will continue on to Mishnah 17, where we have Rabbi Shimon, as in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Until then, have a wonderful and blessed week.